Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan McNeil. This is the Builder by Day podcast. Today, I am joined by Waye Mason, current district councillor, HRM District 7. Do I have that correct? And more importantly, well, maybe not more importantly, but the reason why you're here today, running for mayor.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
I guess the place to start is why am I running for mayor? And I'm running for mayor because I'm proud of like how much the city has changed and the municipality has changed in these last 12 years. I make this joke all the time that when I first got elected, the city was shrinking. The population had gone down in 2011, and people were legitimately worried business was going to move to Moncton, and all our kids were going to grow up in Alberta. Mm-hmm. And now here we are 12 years later, and I do a lot of guest lectures at universities, and I have to insert slides to paint that, like, to make that frame, because a 20-year-old is like, Halifax has always been the best city ever. Like, what are you talking about, man? They have no idea. I
still think that.
Right? And I think it is the best city ever. That's why I toughed it out. I came back here to go to university. I grew up in Dartmouth. I never left, right? Once I got back here, my dad was in the Navy, we moved in and out. But once I got back here, I never left. And it was always about, this place has so much potential. Well, now we're realizing that potential. And I think Mike Savage has been a great mayor, and we have turned the story around, right? We've turned the story around in Halifax. But with growth comes a different set of challenges. It's not without its challenges. And so now we have to rise to that occasion. We have to address the increased housing concerns, the homelessness that we see in the parks. I came to this meeting from a meeting with a bunch of folks in Glen Arbor and White Hills. And traffic is a big issue out here. It's getting harder and harder and harder to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. So these are problems. We can't minimize them, but I'm glad that we're growing, and I want to see that continue. So, the top themes we're hearing right now are about more housing, affordability. People are being pinched by the energy costs and inflation and interest rates. But then also more recently, the other big issue that is popping up is, I've always said, let's make the best decisions win. That's been a catchphrase in our campaign literature and in all my speeches. But what that really means is we've got to make decisions based on evidence and facts, not on things we heard at Tim Hortons or stuff that's trending on Twitter or the latest post on Reddit. It has to be based on facts.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
And facts sometimes are uncomfortable. It's not necessarily what the public believes is to be true. And, some of my opponents are really kind of leaning into what they're seeing in polling data and on the internet as the thing that people are angry about. And I think we need to keep focused on real solutions to our actual problems. To go on a tangent, right? Like coming out of COVID, a lot of people are still angry. I think we all have undiagnosed PTSD still, and the spending 2 years in our houses not really talking to anybody beyond our immediate family didn't help anything. So we have to get away from arguing and into discussing, right? We have to get away from black and white and get people back at, like we just had this meeting with folks at Edible Matters, and not everybody at the table from the Residents Association agreed, and not everything I said everybody agreed with. But because we were sitting looking eyeball to eyeball and having a conversation, and there was a lot of goodwill in the room, you're able to come up with a general agreement about these are the kind of things that need to happen to address the concerns of this community. And we don't know all the solutions, but we all agree that we're going to try really hard to find something that actually can happen soon. Sure. And it was interesting because their biggest concern was not distrust that anything would happen, that they just feel they've seen big complex solutions that have been proposed that never come to light when they're saying, could we just replace that three-way stop with a roundabout so traffic stops backing up?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so it was a very good conversation, but I think restoring trust to dialogue right now, that's why this election is so important. It's very frustrating for me as a guy who is kind of likes to nerd out on evidence and data and get technical, as I'm always at risk in an interview like this in doing.
I don't like to nerd out. I just like to argue.
Well,
I'm the same way. I just want to get to the fact, but then I want to argue about it.
Yeah, that's fine, right? But once we all have an agreed to set of facts, then there's usually a bunch of different solutions, right?
Absolutely.
So then we can argue about that. But
then we're argue might not be the right term. Then we're debating about what the best solution might be instead of still arguing about what the facts are. So I'm with you.
My wife went to NASCAD. She's a graphic designer, and there's a huge difference in, they say in the art world, crit isn't criticism, right? Like when you crit someone's painting, you're helping them make it better. You're talking about ways that you could do that art better, that graphic design better, that sculpture better.
Sure.
Criticism is just, you did it wrong, you suck. Right.
Sure, yeah.
And so it's okay to have crit. It's okay to have dialogue. It's okay when we don't agree and we're trying to find what's the best solution. That's different from the very black and white kind of stuff we've had for the last 4 years where we need to get back to that level where people trust having those conversations.
Actually, I live in Fall River. Actually, haven't seen any of your yard signage.
The signs are interesting. I mean, we're driving out there and I see, let's be honest, right? It's a 3-horse race, even though there's 16 people. And
right.
I see some Pam signs. I saw one on private property, but I see a lot in public space. You see a million Andy signs, but they're all in the right of way. They're all on roads, right? They're not actually on people's lawns. And so we are fighting against an establishment candidate who has a lot of money and is plugged into the Liberal Party apparatus federally, though not that it's all entirely mobilized for him. And so I do feel like we're the Rebel Alliance fighting the insurgent campaign. Every sign, for the people from the meeting I just had took signs literally out of my car. They would have taken more if I'd had them. And they're going to put them on people's lawns. And I think that speaks more than having a dozen signs in the median in the Larry Tech Drive, right?
Somebody voluntarily putting your sign in their yard is entirely different from you putting a sign on the side of the highway.
Yeah. So it's like, I guess what I would say to people right now is, where's the money coming from to be able to have giant signs at every single intersection? And what does that say, right? Like for me, we're looking for people to donate money and volunteer, and we're seeing a huge surge in support right now, which is great. And I don't think it's still anybody's guess when 50% of the population in every poll says they haven't made up their mind. But it's a heavy lift to beat incumbent with that kind of name recognition, but I think I can do it.
Sure. I did. I actually met with Pam Lovelace yesterday. She was kind enough to come sit with me and have a chat, and it was great. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you doing this today as well, especially since, as I mentioned to Pam when I spoke with her, I reached out to you. I'm like, who the hell is this guy, right? I just sent you an email. You responded immediately, as did Pam. I really appreciate that. It speaks to the type of person you are, and I think that's important. So what I'd like to do, just again, I just want to keep the conversation moving along. I'd like you to do most of the talking. You already touched on it, but it's probably the conversation that I can relate to the most as it relates to housing, since I'm in the industry of building housing. What are your thoughts on that? And what I mean by that is specifically the homeless and unhoused situation in Halifax is, I was born and raised here as well. I went to St. Mary's University, whatever that is, however many years, 20 plus years ago. We're running around the streets of Halifax. And I used to I mentioned to Pam when I spoke with her, I used to pull a rickshaw around Halifax. I don't even know if people still do that. But if you're wondering, it is as difficult as you think it might be to put two people in a rickshaw at the Split Crow and run them up to Cheers, right? Yeah. And then they show up. And then on cruise ship day, meet them down at the port. They jump in the rickshaw. A couple of Americans. They just arrived in Halifax, never been here. Where do you think they want me to take them?
Citadel Hill.
You got it. Right to the top.
You had thighs the size of like.
No, I wasn't much bigger than I am now. I was I was just far more fit than I am now. I weighed the same, but the weight was in different places. I only did that for one season, and then I realized I'm definitely staying in school.
We'll kill you. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So let's start with tents, and then we'll go to housing and the bigger macro issues. Okay. There's a thing happening right now with in the public. Some folks believe that encampments or allowing tenting creates homeless people and tents, right? And it couldn't be further from the truth. 95% of these people are people who are homeless because they can't afford anywhere to live. And, it's actually tragic. Last summer in Victoria Park, we knew that 8 of the people who were closest to the Anglican Church, to the Cathedral Church of All Saints, were senior citizens who'd been in the shelter at Christ Church in Dartmouth and kicked out when the funding stopped in May. We knew that 8 or 10 of the kids in the cluster around the Olin's Fountain were foster kids who'd aged out of the system and had nowhere to go. And Phoenix House is full every night right now, with turning away 18 to 20 kids a night who have nowhere to go. And so it's a huge societal tragedy happening right now that we have people living in tents. A small number of them might be tourists, and a small number of them might have serious mental health and drug issues. But a lot of them are they're literally our neighbors down on their luck, right? Okay. And so we don't want, there is a future where no one is in a tent in a park. We don't want that. I don't think nobody wants that. And the encampments and the tents right now are there because they have nowhere else to go. But the good news is the province is building hundreds of units that'll be open by December, and they have hundreds more units coming in the new year, and they have more that they haven't announced to us yet because they don't want to get hopes up and then fail to deliver.
That never happens.
And we've seen that with the pallet houses. They're a year behind schedule, and only 100 of the 200 are open that the province is committed to. But there are hundreds of units coming right now, right? The tiny homes in Sackville and the correctional ball field, the pallet shelters, they leased another hotel, the Coastal Inn on Windmill Road, and we've gone from the province, who's responsible for shelter, spending a couple $1 million a year to hundreds of millions a year, which you have to when you're in a crisis like this, with federal participation.
I agree. And we collectively as the taxpayers are spending a lot of money to address the problem. And I think I have run into very few. I personally haven't run into anybody who doesn't believe that we should be doing that.
Well, we're Nova Scotians. We take care of one another, right? That's what we do. Yes. Of course, we want to take care. We want to take care of these vulnerable people. We don't want to punish them for being poor, right? But there's a system failure, which we'll get to in a second, about like how did we end up in this situation, and you got to acknowledge that. But I guess I just want to end that part by saying, I think we're probably by next summer we'll have very few tents and encampments, and I think that we can see the end of it. I hate to say a timeline. People want you to say by next fall or by the summer, but we don't control how fast the province makes shelter and housing, and we don't control how fast people get rent evicted and put out on the street. Right. But there's some good signs to switch to housing. Vacancy has ticked up a tiny bit. Lease-ups are slowing down a little bit. Population growth has been stagnant the last couple of months in Halifax. Those are all providing a little bit of relief, also scary as heck to builders and to people who want more housing built faster, right? Like, that's not a universally good news story, but it might give us a bit of a pause to catch up. But historically, Halifax has been anti-development. It has. When I got elected, we brought in the Centre Plan as one of the first new plans to come into Halifax since before amalgamation, and it created tens of thousands of potential units on the peninsula. Prior to that, every time you wanted to build a big building, you had to fight the neighbors and fight City Hall, and it was a great big thing, and you'd ask for 20 because you really wanted 10 and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. We don't want to do that. We want to say, here's where tall buildings are allowed, pull a permit and build, right? And we've started to get there in the center. Problem is that we haven't done that in the suburban and rural areas yet, and that's coming. That's the suburban plan. And the other problem is, you and I both know, you as a builder and me as a councillor, that the regulatory supply of housing, can I swear on this show?
Yeah, well,
is bullshit, right? You can
absolutely
beep that, right?
Yeah, we'll beep it. We'll keep it in because you said
thank you. Well, it's great that we now have, between what the province has done and what the city has done, we now have a couple 100,000 units of theoretical units that could be built any minute. But, they got to be built, right? You've got to be able to pull a permit, and that is still agonizingly too long. Mm-hmm. You got to be able to find labor, and you got to be able to get it to pencil, right? I mean, it's amazing that we still have as much. I mean, we've gone from 10 years ago, we had 1,950 units under construction, and now we have 8,500 units under construction right now at the same time, or in 2023 is the last stat. And there was that statistic. It was
do you count like pallet shelters and so on in those units?
No, it's under construction. The tiny homes probably are because they're actual units, right, with bathrooms and kitchens. But the pallets and stuff wouldn't count. Okay. There's that article in All Nova Scotia last week about how we have the most starts and the most construction per capita in Canada and all that stuff. And I'm on a national board with a senior CMHC guy, and he says that they consider Halifax kind of a miracle because we're still building. A lot of places have slowed down with the interest rates. When your construction loans are at 8%, people weren't building in a lot of places, but we have a lot of deep-pocketed, multi-generational families who kept building here. So on a lot of ways, we're lucky. But the flip side is that means that the cost per unit's really high, so the rent they need to recover that and make that pencil is high.
Yeah, it has to make sense.
Right? Yeah. And so with the market changing now, I am worried. It's a lot harder to get labor and construction costs down now to match if the interest rates haven't come down enough, but if the rent expectation starts to drop, it's going to be harder and harder to get things to pencil and keep building. Yeah,
Pam mentioned that yesterday as well. She mentioned something about costs coming down. The costs as they relate to interest, of course, will fluctuate with interest rates, but I don't see any scenario where costs go backwards unless the land becomes less expensive somehow. I don't see anything labor and or material coming back. I've been doing this for roughly 20 years as a builder. That costs they only move one way, and that's upward.
Yeah.
So I don't see them coming backward.
Well, there was a point where we were renovating our cottage in Pugwash, and I went into the Home Hardware in Pugwash into Harrison's, and I said, I need a single sheet of 3/4 inch plywood for where I'm fixing this floor. And she said, honey, that's $190. Yeah. And that was 2 years ago, right? And the prices did come down from that, but I don't think they're going down a whole lot lower than they are.
But
that was in the crazy crisis, right? But I think people saw that price flexibility, and they think that that's kind of the norm. And you and I both know it's not, right? We're kind of back down to the floor where it's going to be. Interest rates will come down. You mentioned land prices. One of the unexpected things that has happened because of all of the Housing Accelerator Fund and the province coming in and pushing new rules on the city is that people's property suddenly has more rights, or maybe will have more rights all the time. And I think, frankly, that a lot of developers have overpaid for property. So now we're in a position where we have like the Construction Association and others saying, oh, well, we shouldn't be required to have step backs and setbacks or any architectural features whatsoever because my project won't pencil. And I'm like, you paid too much. That's how I feel about that, where it's like, no, we don't want the city to look like Blade Runner, right? We want to actually have some standards. We want light penetration. We want to consider wind on streets when we build, right? And so I'm definitely seeing people who are under pressure because they can't pencil, even if the interest rates come down. They cannot get to the place where they're going to be in the black and they're going to hit their cap rate. You see that right now. And so I think there's going to be a bit of a market reset that's going to happen over the next couple of years. And that doesn't help get units built. But I think the other thing
the term market reset doesn't get me excited in the industry.
No, I understand what you're saying.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but part of me wants to agree with you. Part of me wants that to happen, and a bigger part of me goes, I hope not.
Well, the market's going to find equilibrium. That's what markets do. Who knows what direction it's going to go? Sure. And I would, we could go deep. We could do a totally separate podcast just about thoughts on this, right? Like,
I'll take you up on that.
Does CMHC stuff 30 years, 5%? Are we actually making it so you can charge more, and that's actually driving up costs? Mm-hmm. Probably. That's what economics would say, right? But what are you going to do? Tell all these young people that they just can't ever buy a house, and we're not going to do anything to change the rules to help them? So there's a lot to balance there. But to bring this back to housing and what we're doing, I think the core thing for the city is to be able to get permits faster. I have proposed that we should do deemed approval for, if you have a architecture stamp and you have an engineering stamp. I had one guy on social media saying, that'll make it more expensive because you have to pay for that, but you're already paying for that anyway. You have to have that when you submit, right? But one of the things I hear from builders all the time is, why is somebody who's not an engineer arguing my engineer was wrong when you're trying to get a building permit, right?
Yeah, I have those arguments often.
I know you do. All of you do. We all do. And so how do we improve the system to shorten that, because time is money. So if we can get those building permits out faster. And then the other one that drives me crazy, that's from a small house.
Permits are also very expensive.
Yes. Well,
very expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge portion of, I don't mean it's a huge portion, but it's a very significant number in the bottom line of what that home costs to build.
I think, and this is the conversation that's a big one, is we have focused on making development pay for growth in the past, right? That if we need a new roundabout at the end of the road here, that the new buildings that are coming in that are increasing the traffic should be contributing to that or paying for that. And maybe that's not the right thing to do in every case, but I think that there has to be an element of that. But one of the things that I hear loud and clear from developers and builders is the more we push the permitting to when you're going for occupancy, like the permit costs, so that you're not having to borrow at that 7 or 8% construction rate to pay the city for the permit. Now that can help a lot.
Oh,
right?
So you're saying perhaps put the permit fees upon completion?
Yeah. Yeah, or some of them. This is something that we've been talking about a lot, right? Like move it to where you'd actually get it in the mortgage instead of in the construction.
Especially if you're talking a 100-unit building or something. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's significant.
The other thing that I hear going to the absolute other end of the scale is any of the large buildings that have to go to the all-hands staff meeting, and we're talking about development agreements for Port Wallace or Opal Ridge or any of that big stuff, right? The proposed new Armco at the Murchison. What drives those developers crazy is they put in their application, they get a bunch of notes back, they make all the changes, they put in their application. It's like it's a brand new application. They get a whole bunch of new notes that are completely conflicting. Maybe not, but there has to be like that all hands meeting, and that review should be a single time, absolutely comprehensive. Engineering should be there. I think the province should legislate that Nova Scotia Power and the utilities need to be there, Heritage Gas and Water, make it a real all hands meeting. And maybe it's a 1 or 2 day meeting for a really big thing like a Port Wallace or a Russell Lake West or whatever. And then you get one revision and that's it. It's got to be done.
Nova Scotia
Move on.
Power are fun to deal with. They're polite. Nova Scotia Power are they're very polite folks to deal with.
Yeah.
But they politely tell you that, we'll call you. Don't
Well, so
call
my
us.
favorite example of how, and the public doesn't understand what you deal with and what I deal with as a councillor and will as mayor, is we had one case, I think it was the Velo on Gottingen Street, where it got approved, but Nova Scotia Power had not been involved somehow, or it just had never crossed anybody's mind. And they had to, if you look along Gottingen Street, there's like, I think 3 floors where all of the decks or the patio doors are bolted shut, because you could reach out and touch the 10,000 volt line going by, right? And it's just like, so you can't have a kid with a broom or a hockey stick who can touch the line, obviously. So aligning that stuff, getting it so it's all in one place so that you can get a very quick decision on, especially on the large projects, the master plan communities. There's a lot of questions around, a lot of the structure and regulation around construction and utilities is still based on the idea that all the utilities are owned by the government, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like Nova Scotia Power inspects itself, right? Like they inspect all the work in a house.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense, right? That only made sense when they were the government, when they were the Power Commission. And so there's a lot of changes that, the thing I said this just earlier today is we didn't have to fix any of this stuff because nothing was happening, right? 15 years ago, we were in a steady state from like 60s, 70s until, 2015, 2014. And so you didn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make these processes better when there wasn't a lot of construction and we weren't growing by 5 and 6 and 7% a year, where we hadn't added 100,000 people to the city in just the last 8 years. And now we need to think about how do we continue to grow at this speed, but make it easier and not lose any value. And a friend of mine sent me a podcast 9 months ago that changed my life, because it's about government. It's not as boring as it sounds. And what the summary of this long podcast was: bureaucrats and technical thinkers will say, this process doesn't work, so I need to add another layer. But the way to fix most processes is to subtract from the process, to say, what's the outcome? What am I trying to achieve? And just have the bare minimum steps to ensure that you meet that outcome, and nothing more, nothing less. And we have never had to do that exercise here. There was no need, right? But now we do. Maybe there should be an engineering standard, and any private company can come and you have an outside engineer paid for by you that stamps it, and then Nova Scotia Power has to do an inspection and connect, right?
Sure.
Like it should go faster.
And perhaps they would welcome that. I'm sure the only reason for the delay would be a lack of person power to do it, I guess. Hopefully.
Well, yeah, nobody was sitting, and that's one of the things and it's the same with the city, it's the same with the utilities, it's the same with labor, it's the same with the whole ecosystem of building. There weren't thousands of people sitting around just in case we suddenly had a building boom, right? Like they were all cooks or working in a restaurant or working at Walmart or something, and now we have to retrain them and get them out there. It's the classic joke you hear all the time: you can make $25 an hour pushing a broom on a work site right now. There was no,
I know
there weren't there like outside of Halifax, those municipalities don't have building inspectors right now because we've stolen them all, or they've moved to Western Canada, or they've retired, and it's hard to train a building inspector. We didn't have a whole bunch sitting on the bench just waiting for when we had a growth spurt, and here we are. So we got to work through it, but acknowledging, what's the phrase they say? Admitting you have a problem is the first step, right?
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
Yes, I would agree. There are problems, but like anything, I think if we would just try to come up with solutions to the problem instead of arguing about
Absolutely.
it would be
Absolutely.
better. You did mention that you wanted to speak more so on the perhaps macro causes or issues of, if we come back to the homelessness and housing situation, as to why we're in this situation.
Yeah.
Do you have some thoughts on that you want to share?
Yeah. I mean, it all started with COVID, right? When COVID happened, it created permission for people to be in tents and parks because we had the existing shelters had their capacity cut by Dr. Strang in half or less. And so there was a point, it was a horrible point in April, May 2020, not even before that, March, April 2020, where they were kicking people out of shelters and the government was handing them tents and telling them to go to a park because there was nowhere else to put them, right? And the government was a little slow to start renting hotels and stuff, and hotels can be problematic because, you can't cook in them and things. And so they're not ideal for everybody. I think they're better than a tent, but I understand why some people don't like them. So we ended up, because of COVID, with this situation with a lot of people in tents. At the same time, we had that first year of COVID, a bunch of people moved to Halifax, right? I know a lot of them. A lot of people moved back to be closer to their mom and dad during the COVID or
Where
whatever.
were they moving from? Other parts of the province or other provinces?
Everywhere.
Okay.
But I know a half a dozen friends who cashed out their houses in Toronto, took their equity bump and bought a house in Cache here, right? So they could be near their elderly mom and dad during the crisis. And now they work here. And remote work also helps with that. And the economy growing helps with that. And so we have always been, I said earlier, Halifax was anti-development. We were very slow to approve stuff. We loved taking 3 and 5 years to approve a single building. And there is a really good argument that we should have been building more or approving more for 20 years, 30 years, right? So that we didn't even keep pace. But we certainly were behind the 8 ball when we had 20,000 people move here that year, and then 29,000 people move the next year. And then I think it was just under 20 the next year, right? But we've grown, we've added a huge 60, 70,000 people in the last 3.5, 4 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because how many units do you think we've built in that period of time?
Not enough.
Half that much?
Right? Yeah. So we have 8,500 under construction. You and I both know that it takes 3 years to complete them now instead of 6 months when they were stick built 1,200 square feet in Westfall and Sackville back in the 60s. Takes longer to build these more complex buildings to the modern standards. And those 8,500 can house, it's 2 people roughly, 2.1 people per unit. That's 16,000. So we've almost built enough in the last 2 years for the first year of COVID.
Yeah, see,
right.
To me, that's just
it's not enough.
Just doesn't work.
Right. But right now, where we're at is, even with the delays and the things that I absolutely want to fix, I have most of the biggest developers in town the last couple of years saying, you could let me build whatever I want and I can't build any faster. There isn't any way that there isn't enough money and people to build faster.
Single family home builders, we're not in that same situation. Just there, people are contacting us. Our office. I am what you would consider a mid-sized builder in this marketplace. There are folks that build far more number of units than I do, and there are home builders that build less than I do. But we don't have a problem like the multi-unit folks do when it comes to labor and availability of hands.
Stick built single units and duplexes and even 4 pads. Anything that we can do with I keep saying stick built, that's wood frame. That stuff we need. That's why we're trying to incentivize that. Even in the regional center, that's where we said, we're going to allow up to 8 units if the lot's big enough, and on Roby Street or whatever, and encouraging that, because that would be the same kind of, that it would be more in your wheelhouse than building with concrete and formwork and big HVAC and all those things. Yeah. Recognizing that once you get over 3 units, you're still into sprinklers and all that kind of stuff, and it starts to get more complicated. But I would say the other big thing that has changed and that we need to really push is we've moved away from we're seeing more and more 30-foot, 40-foot of frontage or townhouse style construction, which can be faster and cheaper for younger people to buy. And so I agree. One of the underutilized things that we need to get more units out there, and they're also built faster than these big complex buildings, is the single family homes and the townhouses and that kind of stuff. And so we've made changes in the center to do that. I think we need to make more changes in the suburbs to do that. The solution to the housing crisis is to do all things at once. It's not any one thing. There's not one solution.
Yeah, I'll throw this out there just as this could be a conversation for another time, but
We should do our own podcast.
that's right. We're doing it right now. We'll just have to do
We're just have to do
round
10
two.
more.
We'll do round 2 after the election. When it comes to single family homes,
Yeah.
are you familiar with the bare land condo scenario when it comes to suburban land or rural land, even where you have no water and sewer, no city services, so you're sharing wells and septics?
Yeah.
I won't dive into that because we could go on a tangent. I've built some homes in communities like that. If that process was easier to make happen, and what I mean by that, if I could take 1 acre of land and quickly and easily and at a low expense turn that into a bare land condo, whereby and we put 4 single family small affordable units, 800 square feet each,
Shared
1,000,
services,
600.
bare land
They share
condo.
a well.
Yep.
They share
Yep,
a
yep,
septic.
yep.
They're one driveway in, and everyone has their own little driveway. They have their own space, but we now just have one lot. I can now take the lot price and divide it in 4 as it pertains to the value of each of those 4 units. That's going to bring the cost way down, but that bare land condo thing is complicated, and it's lawyers, and it takes a while to do. If that was easy to do, if we could easily, from a municipal government and planning and permitting perspective, if we could easily carve that lot into its own 4-unit lot, but the difference is I have to be able to divide it in order to sell each unit. Now, if I want to put 4 units on it and rent them, no problem. If the lot is approved for 4 units.
So here's the thing, right? Do we need strata condo to make that happen? Yes or no? And the answer is probably not. It's just not our practice here. So this is something I was talking to a banker about, because you look at Montreal and it's all about main streets with 3 units, but they're in one building and they're not registered condos, right? They're bare land condos, but they're allowed to be sold individually because they have their own power and they have their own water supply,
right,
and they count as being their own unit. And I was talking to a banker here just literally about 3 weeks ago, and she said, "Oh, you can do that here." I was like, "Well, why don't we do it here?" And she said, "Because people don't know how to do it. It hasn't been historically how we've done things here." Sure. So I feel like this is a great conversation to have. I know that if there's an impediment, we need to fix it, but I think we can probably get away with it. It's just like our regulators, our banks, even property online and, the province and all that. It's not something we've done historically, but apparently there's not much, or there's no legal impediment to it. And I also think part of why we haven't been doing it that way, especially in rural with bare land condo, is that we as a municipality were pushing you to do open space or the conservation design, right? Which I want to acknowledge to you, like I want to acknowledge to the world, is expensive. So I agree, we need to both look at the bare land condo thing, absolutely. And that has implications not just in rural, but like my house is 2 units and we could turn it into 3 units on Vernon Street. Sure. I should be able to sell the units.
Yes, exactly. That's the point. The kicker is being able to sell the units. If you
100%.
Tomorrow we can build and you might have a certain PID and it allows up to 4 units, let's say. That's great. But if I don't want to be a landlord and renting 4 units, if I'd rather build 4 affordable units that I could sell to first-time home buyers for, dare I say, $200,000 each.
So
imagine.
You and I have gone down a rabbit hole, and I know Brad from my campaign and your guy are both going, I wonder if they're ever going to talk about mayor stuff. So I'm going to talk about mayor stuff with you right now. And I'm just going to say, this is the kind of leadership I want to bring to council, is that you and I should be able to have this conversation after October 19th. And this is something I've done as a councillor. I call them bringing everybody to the high table, right? I had to do this with electric buses. I've had to do this with some development issues where you do a command performance. You ask Nova Scotia Power to come, whoever. In this case, let's get some people from the province, a couple of bankers, and you and me, and maybe somebody from, construction association or whoever's appropriate, and let's look at what's legally allowed and where the impediments are, and then let's all collectively go to the province and make sure it gets fixed. Like this should be fixed. It has huge implications. I want my 30-year-old son and his amazing partner, Amy, to buy something someday.
Get the hell out of your basement.
They're actually in a really nice place on Rector Street, but they're afraid to tell the landlord that only one burner works on the stove because they don't want him to realize they're only paying $14.50 a month for a 2-bedroom, right?
Yeah, sure.
So like they want to buy a place and they have good jobs, but what they want is they basically want to buy an apartment. They want to do exactly what we're talking about. They want that kind of Montreal, Toronto, Brooklyn, New York style thing.
Sure.
But also Amy's from Yarmouth and she might be into country living too. So what you're talking about works on every level. And as mayor, that's the kind of conversation I want to have with folks. How do we get the right people in a room? All of us want to solve that problem. There won't be a single person in Nova Scotia going, nope, I don't like it. I don't want to allow people to buy Bearland condos and make it cheaper to buy houses. Everybody wants to solve it, but we've got to all pull together to make it happen. And that's the kind of thing I love to solve. My other pitch is, right, I mean, it's pretty much between me and Andy. And Andy's a great guy, but we are also going to have 8 new councillors. We're going to have a very green council. And so when I say I'm ready to be mayor day one, what I mean is I know how the city works and who the key players are and who on staff does what and what's in flight right now. And based on the last election where we had 8 new councillors and it took them between 1 and 3 years to learn how to do the job, we don't want people doing on the job training. So my pitch to the public is I am ready to go day one, and we need that because we don't want to lose momentum on all these important things that are happening. And if you like what you're hearing, go have a look at my platform, masonformayor.ca/vision.
For those that aren't familiar with you, Waye, this is your 12th. You've been doing this for 12 years.
I got elected in 2012. I beat a 13-year incumbent. I had come to be known in my community because I fought the school board. Remember when the school board got fired?
School board, what's that?
Yeah, there used to be school boards for the young kids in the room. And they tried to close my kids' school. So I got really involved with fighting the school board. And I was known also, I used to work in the music business and taught at NSCC. I got elected 12 years ago, for downtown, Halifax South Downtown. Have been president of the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, was deputy mayor, am now on the Green Municipal Fund Council, which is a $2.6 billion national endowment that helps makes communities go green faster. And, have really enjoyed being a councillor and helping to make Halifax a better place. I want to take what I've learned and use that as mayor of HRM.
Excellent. Well, again, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate this. I think we had a great conversation here, and I wish you the best of luck in the election. And if you are successful and you'd like to continue this conversation
always
on or off camera /mic, I'm happy to make myself available.
Sounds great.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.